Hey, this is RockMan. Welcome back to RockMan Reads a Freakin Book, where DK left off. Today I'll be reading chapters 30 through 32 of Jedi by Michael A. Stackpole. It was a night to remember, but for more than just the great time I had with my grandfather. We did hit Coronet City and dined at the finest restaurant on all of Corellia, Nova Nova. Normally reservations were linked in several months in advance, but my grandfather just showed up bearing a bouquet of flowers, and we were admitted to a private room. The food was all served techno, tiny portions arranged on the plate as if they were art. Sensors in the utensils relayed data to discrete holoprojectors, so one knew the exact contents of each mouthful, indicating hints of what subtle flavors one should expect to taste, or anecdotes concerning the creation of the dish. Made me wonder if Seoul's Tinta's chef, Chid, was working in the kitchen. After that, we went to the private club at the pinnacle of the world's tallest building. The Last Dark Club took its name from the fact that it was the place in the city the sun touched last before night, and from the fact that the majority of the members considered themselves the most enlightened people on the planet. Back when I worked Corsac, we used to joke about the club because we knew none of us could ever afford to join. But my grandfather had become a member in the last 3 years, and half the plants in the place were hybrids he created. The overwhelming elegance of my surroundings sharply contrasted with what I had known at the Jedi Academy, making Yavin 4 seem but a distant memory. Coronet City seemed more right to me. I fit in better here. The Academy's jungle setting had always left me slightly uneasy. I realized, sitting in a plush Nerf hide chair, sipping Corellian brandy and watching the city spread out beneath me, that being city-born and bred, I had a preference for urbanity and civilization. Coruscant was too built up for me to feel comfortable there all the time, but here in Corellia I could feel at home again. Nice place to raise kids. My grandfather told me stories of Booster Tarek from back before my father got him sent to Kessel. Back before George Cardass had eaten up Booster's organization, only in turn to have his organization taken over by Talon Karday. So you see, when Hal caught Booster that first time, Booster considered it pure luck, and forever after worked hard to taunt and elude Hal. My grandfather smiled broadly. I don't think Booster ever truly appreciated your father's skills as a detective. We spoke of many things that evening, even on the ride back to the estate. I discovered in my grandfather that night someone I had never known before. Of course, my first relationship with him had been established as a child to a man, which brought with it certain behaviors. By the time I moved into adulthood, I joined Corsac, and our relationship shifted to more of a professional one. This was not a deliberate shift, but a natural one, since our jobs dominated our lives. While I could speak to him about my romantic entanglements, that again was a youth speaking to an elder. And then, when my father died, the pain we both felt battered us emotionally to the point where sharing feelings hurt too much, so we stoically didn't touch upon subjects that would reopen old wounds. On this night, for the first time, I was able to relate to him as just one adult to another. It was an odd feeling, yet one in which I took great pride. Here was the man who knew my father and Neja better than anyone. If he could like me, if he could respect what I had done, then there was a good chance they would have also. This realization quelled some of the discomfort I'd felt since my final encounter with Exar Kun, and that night I went to sleep feeling better than I had in a long time. Master Skywalker had once said that Jedi do not dream, so when I found myself on a bright, arid world with my lightsaber unlit but held in my right hand, I wondered at how I had gotten where I was. I saw the emerald sleeves of my Corellian Jedi tunic, and even that did not seem out of place, though the material was finer than that of the clothes I had been given on Yavin 4. It wasn't until I looked over to my right and saw Yelnik Ikla, resplendent in his purple cloak, and beyond him, the Jedi General in his brown and khaki desert-born robes, that I realized I wasn't me. The three of us, spread out sufficiently to give ourselves room to fight, stood in a dusty bowl-shaped depression beneath a Duracrete dome. A dozen 3-meter tall pillars scattered around its circumference held the dome aloft, allowing the light from the outside to illuminate the area. Makeshift tents and storage sheds occupied a quarter of the arena in the direction we were facing. Emerging from the central pavilion, 3 figures came out to stand opposite us. Each of them bore a lightsaber. Their leader, the taller, blond man facing the general, took a step closer to us than his comrades. The red-haired woman aligned herself with Yelnik, while the Anzadi, with his proboscis noses, just beginning to peek up from the cheek pouches that hid them, lined up to oppose me. The general, his name eluded me, though I knew I recognized something about him, spoke very precisely. You are meddling with things you cannot control, things that nearly destroyed the Jedi millennia ago. We have come to ask you to abandon your evil and return to the light. The leader laughed slowly, his voice low and laden with contempt. The weak always fear the strong, growing up to replace them. And the foolish always see themselves as strong. The words came from my throat, and I could feel my lips forming them. It almost even sounded like something I'd say, though more formal, more archaic and precise than I would have liked. Yelenik's voice came gentle yet strong. Fear marks the wrong path. We offer you freedom from your fear. Their leader thumbed his lightsaber to life. And we offer you freedom as well. The Anzadi, taller than me, darker, entirely humanoid save for the proboscises uncurling in his excitement, ignited his blue blade and closed with me. Nikos Tyrus, his name came easily to me, held his lightsaber in a guard I'd never seen before. He had his left hand on the hilt fairly close to the shimmering blade, but the blade itself extended out and down from the lower edge of his hand toward the ground. His right hand rode the lightsaber's pommel. Holding the blade out away from his body, with his right hand at the level of his chin, he could waggle the blade back and forth in a triangle of coverage that would ward him well. This triangle style, the thought suddenly came to me like a lost memory, favored a man who was quick, and would combine sweeping strikes at my legs with a flick of the wrist cut that would open me from groin to chin. I knew fear, but the person I was in the dream shunted it away. I held my silvery blade in a simple guard, though I tilted the blade forward, pointing it at his throat. We circled, then he struck. His blade flicked out for my right leg. I swept my blade down to block low right, sparks flying as our blades crashed into each other. He bounced his blade up and over mine and brought it across in a slash meant to decapitate me. I caught the acrid stink as some of my hair melted beneath the lightsaber's lethal caress, but I ducked the blow by a safe margin. Rotating my wrists, I swept my blade back low. Through where his leg should have been, but he leaped up and away from my strike. He flipped backward through the air, displaying great ability with levitation, and landed easily 4 meters away from me. His dark eyes blazed for a moment, then an invisible fist smashed into my chest, knocking me backward. He freed his right hand from his azure blade and flicked fingers at me with the most casual of gestures. A fist-sized stone shot at me from the ground, clipping me on the left shoulder. Pain shot through my arm, leaving it numb. He laughed and hurled another stone toward me. I deflected it with my lightsaber and smiled. Then another rock slammed into the left side of my head. I went down hard, raising a small cloud of dust when I hit the ground. My lightsaber bounced out of my grasp, and I didn't see where it landed. I shook my head to try to clear it, but pain and a faint ringing made that difficult. I could feel blood coating the left side of my face and swiped at it with the left sleeve of my tunic. I heard the crunch of gravel beneath his boots as Tyrus approached. Drawing myself up in a crouch, I glanced to my right and finally saw my lightsaber lying there 2 meters away. I wanted to call it to my hand, but I knew it would never come. I could die for it, but his lightsaber would pin me to the ground before I ever got there. So, it is true what they have said about the Halcyon line. You are wing-clipped Minox. An evil smile spread across Tyrus's face as he brought his lightsaber around to display for me the tool of my destruction. You are a line of weakness. I smiled, knowing what I had to do. We have our strengths. Do you? He whisked the blade back around to his left, preparatory to sweeping it through me. Better summon one swiftly. In the second of life he left me, I caught a vision of him standing above me and my dead comrades. Our slain bodies faded away, but his mocking laughter did not. I knew with a certainty as clear and hard as transparent steel that if I did not deal with Tyrus, my friends and our mission here would be destroyed. I couldn't let that happen, so I acted. I launched myself toward my lightsaber, my right hand reaching for it. My body twisted in the air as I flew. I landed on my back, skidding the last centimeters to where my hand closed on the blade's hilt. Even as I tightened my grip, even as I started to bring the blade around in a parry, I knew it would be too late. So did Tyrus. He stabbed his blade down through my chest. The azure blade melted flesh and boiled blood as it went, reducing my heart to sweet smoke and steam. On further it stabbed, exploding arteries and burning through my spine. The lower part of my body went numb. Though I barely noticed because of the wave of agony surging up through me and into my brain, it threatened to overwhelm me, letting darkness nibble into my sight. I was dying, and I knew it, and regrets poured in with the pain. But I was not dead yet. I was a Halcyon. I was a Jedi. Jedi do not know pain. In an instant, all physical agony ceased as effectively as if I'd flicked a switch and turned all my pain receptors off. All I was left with was an incredible clarity of mind and a singleness of purpose. I dedicated my life to the service of others, to the service of the Force. I would not go out without my duty being fulfilled. I concentrated and employed the greatest Halcyon gift against my enemy. I sucked the energy out of Anzadi's lightsaber and forced myself to smile as I did so. I tasted blood in my mouth, but that fact elicited no panic. It was inconsequential. More telling was the look of surprise on Tyrus's face as his blue blade flickered once, then twice, then went out. I drained it of every last jewel and let him read in my eyes that he should suddenly be very afraid. With the energy I'd pulled in, I plucked him from the ground in a giant invisible fist. He screamed, I think, at least his mouth worked as if he was screaming. I made the fist convulse once, and I felt no resistance as his bones shattered. I let him hang limp in the air for a moment, then hurled him back through the tents to slam him against the dome and a support. I felt a jolt through the Force and saw a blue flash of light, but by then my energy reserves had faded. As did I. I felt spiky red torments racing in to fill my consciousness, but I slipped out of my fleshy prison before they could shackle me to the spot forever. I sat bolt upright in bed, sweat pouring off my body. I felt for the burned, crusted hole in my chest, but found nothing. My head pounded, but I found no torn scalp, no bump rising from a stone, no blood. A shiver ran down my spine, and I realized that I actually could feel my lower body again. I stumbled out of bed and staggered to my room's refresher station. I started cold water running and splashed it on my face as the station's glow panels brightened. I drank from my cupped hands, quenching an intense thirst, then lowered my face into the catch basin and let the water flow over the back of my head. Finally, I brought my head up. As water trickled down over my back and chest, I glanced in the mirror and saw my grandfather's face where mine should have been. I closed my eyes and shook my head. Opening them again, amid the tear tracks, water droplets left on the mirror, I saw Najah Halcyon's features fade and mine return. I reached up and touched my own face, letting my fingers confirm what my eyes saw, and that sent a shoulder-shifting shudder through me. I turned away from the mirror and buried my face in my hands. For the past 10 weeks, I'd been an idiot. I could have seen it. I would have seen it. But by going to the academy, I'd cut myself off from the friends who would have helped me make it all clear to me. My father's saying, if you can't recognize the man in the mirror, it is time to step back and see when you stopped being yourself. Should have been my guide all the way along. In joining Luke, I wasn't being myself. I was trying to become my grandfather. And the dream made it abundantly clear that to do that was a disaster. Corran Horn was not a Jedi. What Corran Horn was an investigator, trained by Corsac to deal with all manner of problems just like the Invids. If they'd been a pirate band working the Corellian sector, I'd have infiltrated them, ferreted out their secrets, and busted them up. I'd done that very thing dozens of times in my career. Granted, no organization I'd faced had been that big, powerful, or elusive, but size works against efficiency with criminal organizations, and power allows for greed to be played off against greed, creating discord. I'd spent 10 weeks wasting my time when I could have been out there going after Mirax's kidnappers the best way I knew how. That sort of investigation certainly would take time, months at the very least. But at least I'd be doing something that would get me closer to Mirax. The Jedi stuff I had learned was fine for saving the galaxy, but I only wanted to save one person, and save her I could. I turned back toward the mirror and nodded to the man I saw there. Good to see you again, Corran Horn. It's time this invid business is ended once and for all. This is a problem that I had with this part of the book, the middle part. I didn't like that this character was like, well, I tried to be a Jedi for 10 weeks and that was a complete waste of time. That was all worthless. I should have been a policeman from the beginning. I should have been myself. I never should have tried to be a Jedi. Of course, it won't necessarily turn out that, in the end, it won't necessarily turn out that way. Let's continue. Chapter 31. The flight attendant on the shuttle smiled at me and leaned down so her lowered voice would not carry very far. It really didn't matter, since my seatmate and I were the only people who had boarded and were in the premier cabin on the shuttle. Forgive me for being so forward, sir, but your pass has an ultraviolet flag on it, and on Tinta Lines we like to afford such honored customers some privileges. The captain isn't yet on board, but he was wondering if you would care to join him in the cockpit for the release and transit over to the Tinta Rainbow. I smiled and would have refused, but Genos Idanian, who I had become for my trip away from Corellia, never would have. I would be delighted to join him. A tone sounded from the back. The flight attendant, rather resplendent in her blue and gold Tinta Lines uniform, glanced back into the main passenger cabin. There, a Kuwati woman was doing her best to stuff a huge carry-all into a starboard, overseat storage compartment and close the door. The flight attendant sighed. You, of course, know your way around a luxury class shuttle, so you can head forward whenever you want. Thanks. My seatmate, a young man whose more prominent features were a big larynx and bigger nose, beamed at me. Do you really know your way around one of these ships? I've studied them at tech school and know they have an Astronav P127 course plotter. But of course we're not going to use it since we're just going on an in-system jump. But it's a beauty and can come up with courses very fast, even multiple jumps. And when I've used the one at school, I could plot a tough course in seconds. I held a hand up. Slow down, breathe. Sorry, he smiled sheepishly at me. It's just that forever and ever I've wanted to fly. Ever since I've been a little kid. I mean really little. I've heard stories about the Rebellion, well, the New Republic now, and Rogue Squadron, and all of them, and I wanted to fly just like them. And when Grand Admiral Thawne showed up, and I volunteered for service to fight him, but I didn't test out very good, so I went to tech school to learn how to fix ships, and then they found I could do good navigation, so they trained me for that. But then Thawne was gone, and forces got demobilized, and so I was looking for a civilian job with the Tinta Line. Really, look, just breathe. I offered him my hand because Genos would do that sort of thing. Genos Idanian. Kiwi Spart. He wiped sweat from his forehead with a long-fingered hand. Freckles covered him. He wore his red hair shorter than mine and was slender enough that he almost reminded me of Kurtan Lure. But this kid wasn't that stupid or mean. So, do you fly one of these things? I have, Kiwi, the military variant. Back during the Rebellion some. I looked around the premier cabin. Those shuttles didn't have the accommodations this one does, and we packed soldiers in fairly tightly, and our Navicomp wasn't as sophisticated as the one you describe. Oh, this is exciting. I smiled. Tell me about it. Okay, he began. I sank back in my seat and kept a smile on my face because that's what Genos would have done. The morning after the nightmare, I had joined my grandfather in the greenhouse and told him what I had resolved to do, to leave Corellia and infiltrate the Invids. He applauded the plan and immediately set about getting me squared away to do so. He took a look at the identification Booster had provided me, and while pronouncing it marginally adequate, he got on the comlink and soon had documents for me that appeared quite genuine. They are, Corran, quite genuine. My grandfather smiled at me. They will pass the most rigorous inspection. I looked at the identification card with my holograph on it. Who is Genos Idanian? Originally, He was a small-time crook, a bit older than you. He vanished, but his record was still on file. I adjusted details and the age to fit you better. You now have some youthful indiscretions in your background, including some ship theft-related problems and some smuggling arrests. Not enough to mark you well known, but enough to suggest you know what you're doing. For your purposes, Genos has since reformed, partially because of his participation in the rebellion, and now works as a broker selling used starships. I thought for a moment, then nodded. The background was not so improbable that I couldn't slip into it. I add a run of bad luck that becomes bitterness about rich folks who have stolen my commissions, and I become a likely pirate candidate with skills they need. You sure this Genos isn't going to come looking for me? Genos hasn't been heard from for over 20 years. If he had surfaced, your father would have gotten him, since Hal was close to arresting him back then. Rostek Horn's smile diminished only slightly. I also have arranged for transport for you on the Tinta Line starship Tinta Palette. You will transfer in the Bormia system to the Tinta Rainbow and make your way to Coruscant. From there, I suspect you can find your way to the Errant Venture and the Invids. I frowned. The Tinta ships are luxury liners and have their cruises booked months in advance. Seoli Tinta loves flowers, Corin. He plucked a bud from a small seedling. She was happy to see to it that a friend of yours would be treated like family. While you might have gotten the death warrants for me quashed, there are still some Imperial sympathizers here who wouldn't mind capturing me and selling me to High Admiral Teradoc or any other self-stylized warlord. Shouldn't I be keeping a lower profile than shipping on a luxury liner? My grandfather laughed easily. My dear boy, 2 things you must remember about Imperial sympathizers on Corellia. They would never believe any rebel stupid enough to come to Corellia in the first place. And second, they would find it impossible to believe any rebel would be able to afford luxury passage on a starliner. Imperial sympathizers here live in a fantasy world 20 years old. They think of the days of Moff Varu as a golden age. Aside from a few Corsac officials, I doubt anyone knows you are a rebel, and those officials would never lay a hand on you. Afraid of flowers? A few. More remember your father very well. I see. I sighed. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate your doing this for me. I've been a fool, and I think you know it. I'd like to thank you for not having bashed me over the head with it. He watched me closely, his gray eyes cooling off. What have you been a fool about? Becoming a Jedi in order to save Mirax. I've wasted so much time. Rostek brushed his hands off, then posted his fists on his hips. I should make this very clear for you, Corin. I don't think you've been a fool. What you've learned is what you needed to learn. It may well be that not everything you studied at the Academy will help you find and save Mirax, but you could not have known that before. I saw Najah do many things to solve cases that had nothing at all to do with the Force or his training as a Jedi, except where that training made him a better person. Going through that training and being able to make the decision you are to abandon it takes a maturity I've never seen in you before. Granted, your adventures with Rogue Squadron and your marriage to Mirax probably imparted much of that maturity to you, but you shouldn't devalue your training. Just because it did not take you where you wanted to go does not mean the journey was not good for you. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you. You didn't. I hold memories of Najah Halcyon very dear. I consider my work here, preserving his knowledge of the Force, to be the greatest thing I could have done with my life, and I am glad that you will have access to it all. I'll even share it with your Luke Skywalker if you wish. Please. He nodded. Consider it done. I am very proud of you, Corin, and whatever course you take in your life. Times may not have changed much here in Corellia, but your ability to survive in the maelstrom of the Civil War amazes me. I walked over and gave him a hug. Again, thank you. He smiled as we parted. Oh, in your document package, along with the journal data cards I gave you, I included a copy of the Corsac files on that smuggler you asked about, George Cardass. It's spelled J-O-R-J, and yet I said it just like George, like the name. I don't want you to think it's someone named George. It's George Cardass. Files were old. He disappeared almost as long ago as Genos Idanian. I hope they are useful. Me too. They'll pay off a debt. Good. He glanced at his chronometer. You'd best finish packing. Tasruck will speed you to the spaceport. One other thing I need to do first. I reached back and opened the small satchel I'd set on the potting bench nearest the door. I drew out Najah Halcyon's lightsaber and presented the hilt to my grandfather. A lightsaber is a Jedi's most prized possession after his friends. I cannot take it with me because very few pirates wear them these days, and to be honest, I've not earned the right to wear it. I'm not Najah Halcyon. I'm not really a Jedi Knight. I want you to keep it. Keep it safe as you have his knowledge and his memory. My grandfather accepted it carefully, as if it weighed 50 kilos. It may seem odd, but this was the missing piece. For the time I knew him, this lightsaber was part of him, an instrument of justice. When he died and the lightsaber never came back with him, I felt justice had also vanished. Now perhaps it has returned. A single tear rolled down his cheek. You may be right that now is not the time for you to accept the Halcyon mantle, but when it is, this shall be waiting for you. I left him there, alone in the greenhouse, with his memories and the memories he had stored in the plants. Tosruck took me to the spaceport, where I shipped out on the Tintapalet, and now found myself, several days later, seated next to Kiwi Spart, listening to the dismal story of his life. You don't say, I said. Yes, it's all true. I've collected every story I can find about Rogue Squadron, and want to put together a history of the unit. I know all of the pilots' profiles, how many kills they had, where they came from, what they look like. Of course, he stared at me intently. Have you ever met any of them? Me? No, not even in passing. I nodded toward the external viewport. See the rainbow yet? Kiwi shut up and pressed his face against the viewport transparisteel. The shuttle Tintablue 7 had docked on the outside of the palette, securely linked to the bigger ship by a docking collar. The shuttle's gangway extended down into the ship, allowing the passengers to move up into the passenger compartments, while ship's crew transferred our luggage to the shuttle's hold. Once everyone was aboard and the shuttle was ready to travel, we'd head over to the Tinta Rainbow and offload ourselves through a similar docking arrangement. Rainbow passengers that wanted to join the Palette would be sent over on a different shuttle, and both ships would proceed on their courses with a minimum of delay. I don't see anything yet. His position at the viewport added nasal tones to his voice. Ship should be showing up soon, though. Well then, I guess I'll take the opportunity to visit the cockpit. Kiwi turned back and grabbed my arm. Take me with you, please? I don't know. Please. He looked at me with pitifully large and sad brown eyes. This is probably the only chance I'll get to see an AP-127CP in a real shuttle. I frowned at him. You wouldn't touch anything, would you? His voice got small. Nope. Maybe I'll talk to the captain for you. He should be getting on board soon. I twisted in my seat to get out and caught a flash of white in space outside. In fact, I wonder what's keeping him. Is that the rainbow? Kiwi looked back outside. Nope, looks like a Mark II Imperial Star Destroyer, and a lot of little ships with it coming this way. I got up from my seat and turned toward the flight attendant, but as I did so, two men came running up the gangway and appeared in the front of the main cabin. Both wore blasters holstered on their hips, and one, the bigger one, brandished a huge vibro blade. Stay calm, the smaller one urged with unpraised hands. Stay calm and no one will get hurt. Now, isn't the vibro blade? I've heard of that on The Mandalorian. The flight attendant quieted two people as the smaller man waved me from the premier cabin back with the rest of the passengers. Apparently he missed Kiwi. Glad you could join us. We're from the Invidious, and we're here to relieve you of your wealth. An older man pointed a palsied finger at the leader. You were Lenars, my cabin steward. Lenars took a quick step around to the starboard aisle, approached the man, and slapped him. I was, you cheap pile of Nerf dirt. I did your scut work because I knew this day was coming. You don't need to hurt anyone else. I kept my voice cool as I met his brown-eyed gaze. I stood in the port side aisle looking at him across a block of 3 seats. You're in control. You can take what you want. That's right, I am in control. Lenars' larger companion slipped past him and stood near the head of the starboard aisle. Lenars held up a hand and waggled his fingers. Let's go, off with the jewelry. You don't surrender it? Baril here will show you why they don't let him work as a manicurist anymore. I could feel the flood of anxiety gushing out of everyone and resorted to a quick Jedi technique to keep from being overwhelmed by it. I spread my senses out, expanding my sphere of responsibility to take in the whole of the shuttle. I wished I could reach out to everyone, inducing calm in them. or causing the two pirates to go to sleep, but I didn't have such skills. The best thing I could do, I knew from long experience in hostage situations, was to let the pirates have what they wanted. Then I sensed Kiwi tensing for an attack. Unseen, he'd worked his way across the premier cabin and was set to spring on Baril. The pirate was big enough that I doubted he'd even feel the impact of Kiwi's assault. With no effort at all, Baril would scrape Kiwi off him, then probably carve the kid up just because he could. And Kiwi, having grown up his whole life wanting to be a hero, saw this as his chance. He'd be a hero, all right, a dead one. "Hey, sport," I called to Lenars. "This is a one-time offer. Leave now and you won't get hurt." "Someone gets hurt, it won't be me." Lenars watched me closely. "Sit down and shut up." I shrugged my shoulders and shook my hands out. "Anytime you care to make me." Lenars looked right and left, disbelief on his face. "How stupid can you be?" His right hand dropped to the butt of his blaster as he stared me right in the eyes. "You're dead." Using the force, I filled his mind with the image of his blaster being drawn and pointing straight at my forehead. I painted a look of terror on my face, but gave him the impression that I'd been concealing a hold-out blaster up my right sleeve. He saw it appear in my hand and swing into line with his body. He had no choice. He pulled the trigger 3 times. But his blaster hadn't yet slid even halfway from his holster. All 3 shots stuck him in the right thigh, collapsing his leg. He went down screaming and thrashed in the aisle. Baril ran toward him and crouched down, taking him out of Kiwi's attack range. The larger man looked at the stricken comrade, then at me. "You're dead." "Not likely." The Halcyon line might not have been strong in the ways of telekinesis, but it's never required much of an effort to slip the latch on an overstuffed cargo compartment. The panel snapped open and the Kawadi's bundle came crashing down to hit Baril across the back of his shoulders. He angrily spun toward it, slashing with his vibroblade, then turned back toward me. By that time, however, I'd vaulted myself across the central seats and caught him in the chest with both feet. He flew back, tripping and stumbling over the Kawadi's satchel, just as Kiwi came charging blindly in from the premier cabin. Kiwi's forehead caught Baril square on the chin. The bigger man went limp and crashed down while Kiwi caromed off him and landed sprawled across the laps of 2 young women. I snatched up Lenars' blaster, flicked it to stun, and pumped a shot into him. I fired 2 more into Baril. I turned and tossed the weapon to the flight attendant. "Can you retract the gangway?" She caught the gun and nodded hesitantly. "I can, but only on the captain's order." I glanced at her name tag. "Okay, Anissa, you've got the order." "Sir, I know you are qualified to fly one of these shuttles, but..." I opened my hands. "There's more pirates coming, and your pilot likely isn't. I'd just as soon be out of here. We might as well make a run, because waiting here isn't going to do us any good." She thought for a second, then nodded. "As ordered, Captain Adanian." I grabbed Kiwi by his collar and hauled him from the laps of the 2 women who, from the looks on their faces, were convinced he'd saved them from certain death. "You really know how to work an AP-127 whatever?" "The AP-127CP?" His larynx bounced up and down as his voice cracked. "Yes, sir." "You aren't lying, are you? Lives are at stake here." He straightened up and assumed a pose he clearly thought of as military. "I can do it." I smiled. "To the cockpit then, my boy. You wanted to fly in combat? This is going to be it." Kiwi rubbed at the bump on his forehead. "We're going to try to outrun an Imperial Star Destroyer? That a problem for you?" I narrowed my eyes. "Well, it won't be easy." "Yeah, well, if it was easy, it wouldn't be worth doing." I gave him a shove toward the front of the shuttle. "You just plot me a course and get me an exit vector. I'll get us on it, and we'll all get out of here." He glanced back at me. "Sir, even a rogue squadron pilot couldn't get us out of here. I know." "And after this, you'll know some more." I patted him on the back. "Strap in, son. You're in for the ride of your life." Now that was a good chapter. Chapter 32. I dropped into the cockpit command chair, pulled on the communications headset, and started hitting switches. The layout hadn't been modified much from that of the shuttle I'd flown to Yavin. I noticed the weapons control panel had been replaced with something labeled Entertainment System. Shrugging, I punched a button and started some hollow drama playing in the back. Kiwi sat across from me in the navigator's position. He strapped in and sat there for a moment, then looked up and froze. The Invidious hung out there in space, its dagger shape de-emphasized since we were looking at a profile shot of the ship. Its deck plane lay slightly below ours. If we took off in a straight line, we'd pass a good 100 meters over the top of the ship's main decks. I eyed the ship the way I would have were I was sitting in an X-Wing's cockpit, checking the guns, locating the shield generators. On the secondary monitor, I brought up a scan of the Invidious and saw it didn't have shields up. Just one proton torpedo and you'd pay for that arrogance, Tavira. I glanced over at Kiwi, but he'd not moved. Problem, Kiwi? He blinked and shivered. No, sorry. You can use the Navicomp? Yeah, sure. He started punching buttons. Where to? Short hop out to the edge of the system, then double back across it. From there we head out. I frowned and thought for a second. Get us into the Quent sector. El Chandru Pika. I have friends there. Okay, course is being plotted now. My console beeped and I saw the gangway had been retracted. Kiwi hit the green button over there. He looked up and punched the button that released our docking claws and retracted them. Done. Good. On your right, the inertial compensation unit. From the cockpit, dial it back to 0.95. For the passengers, keep it at full. I glanced around. We have to have shields here somewhere, don't we? Kiwi smiled. Over here. I've got them. Hey, these are Chetpat Supreme Defender models. Very nice. I hope we don't need them. I punched the ignition switch, powering up the main drive unit, and shunted power to the repulsor lift coils. I hit the button for the ship's intercom and tried to keep my voice light. We're on our way. Sit tight and you shouldn't feel a thing. I hit a button on the comm unit to try to make a call for help, but a hideous screeching filled the headset's earpieces. They're jamming the comm channels. I snapped the comm unit's jamming filter on, which killed the screech. Kiwi's eyes widened. We can't summon help. Nope, we're really on our own. Of course, if help were close enough to summon, Tavira would be out of here very fast. The fact that she's actually here means there's no rescue coming. Anissa came into the cockpit and strapped herself into the jump seat I'd been offered earlier. Everyone is seated and braced. Okay, I took a moment, concentrated, then nodded. Kiwi, first heading. Course 223, angle 315. I copy. Power to shields. Shields full. Anissa, can you hit the scan recorder? I want to pull in as much data as I can while we head out. I settled my hands on the steering yoke and stared out at the Invidious. Here we go. I nudged the throttle forward and pulled back on the yoke, lifting the nose. As it came up and the palette slipped away beneath us, I hit the switch to lower the wings and lock them in place. I knew that if our raising the shields had not alerted the Invidious to the fact that something was wrong, lowering our wings certainly would. A glance at my tactical screen showed 3 tri-fighters breaking off a patrol and beginning to vector in on us. The wings locked down, so I shoved the throttle to full, then pitched the ship forward into a dive. Our comm unit crackled as the jamming faded on the emergency comm frequency. Shuttle tinted blue. This is the Invidious. Stop now and we won't destroy you. Kiwi stared at me horrified. Shouldn't you say something to them? I nodded toward the comm headset at Kiwi's side. You talk to them. Me? I'm busy here. I rolled the shuttle and pulled back on the yoke, curling us up and away from our dive. An old Corellian corvette had moved to block our course and filled space around us with ruby shafts of light. I saw 2 blue ion bolts shoot past, so I hit the etheric rudder and rolled to starboard, breaking us off the glide path we'd been on. I broke back to port again with a snap roll, pulled the nose up for a second, then jammed the yoke forward again. This left us with the Invidious filling our view screens. The ship's heavy turbo lasers turned inward, trying to shoot at us, but we'd gotten in close enough that the side-mounted guns had trouble tracking us. Better yet, the light show they created in trying to shoot us had caused the clutches to break off for a moment. Kiwi donned the headset. This is Tinta Blue 7, Invidious. Lovely, I muttered, gonna ask if their intentions are honorable. He shrugged. Are your intentions honorable? Tinta Blue, are you insane or trying to commit suicide? Kiwi frowned. A rather tautological question, isn't it? The blubbered sounds of confusion from the Invidious's comm officer prompted me to smile. Way to keep them guessing, Kiwi. The smile growing on his face died abruptly as an angry female voice came onto the frequency. This is Admiral Tavira, Tinta Blue. We are not playing games. I held a hand up to quiet Kiwi. Sorry, Admiral, we are. Catch us if you can. I punched the comm unit's power down, shutting it down. then rolled the shuttle so we skimmed along belly to belly with the Invidious. I yanked back on the yoke to get us pointed away from the Star Destroyer, then cranked the controls slightly to port, starting the ship into a flailing spiral that made stars into white circles before us. When we could see them between scarlet sheets of turbo laser fire, that was, Kiwi braced himself as if the convergence of the ship's port and starboard beams were a wall we were going to slam into. "We're going to die!" Not even halfway. I chopped the throttle back, reversed thrust for 2 seconds, then kicked it full again and straightened our flight. Ship's turbo lasers flashed in on us, and the Chepat shields crackled as some of them grazed us, but we sailed on through with our hull intact. Once past the point of convergence, I started the shuttle weaving again. "Engage the hyperdrive when we're clear, Kiwi." The young man stared at me. "How did we—" Later, I gave him a reassuring smile and felt a lot of relief inside as well. I'd been treating the shuttle as I would a fighter, albeit a big, slow, wallowing monster of a fighter. Its handling reminded me of that of a Y-wing, actually, but slower and more clumsy. It wasn't an elegant craft, and was never meant to be. The fact was, though, that it was a big craft with huge shield generators. Surviving a direct hit by a Star Destroyer salvo would have been impossible, but the reverse thrust flutter there threw off the Invidious's gunners enough that their shots didn't arrive all at the same time. We lost a lot of shield power, but they didn't collapse, so we got away. While big and slow, the one advantage the shuttle had over a fighter was its ability to survive damage. Kiwi threw the hyperdrive lever, and the stars lengthened into a tunnel for a couple of seconds, then snapped back to pinpoints as we reverted to real space. New heading is course 137, angle 045. I copy. I pulled back on the yoke and brought the ship around to starboard. I glanced at my tactical screen. "We're clear and good to go, Kiwi, if you will do the honors." Kiwi threw the lever again, and we were off. At the far side of the system, we made another course correction, then settled in for the journey to Elshandru-Pika. I'd been there once before, back when the squadron was off on its own, fighting Yasan Isard for control of the Bacta cartel. Kiwi, with his interest in Rogue Squadron, knew all about Elshandru-Pika, and regaled Anissa and me with the story of Rogue Squadron's adventure there. His recounting of the story actually took longer than the whole operation, but we had time to kill. And by the end of it, of course, Anissa wanted to kill poor Kiwi. We reverted to real space, and I set us on a course for the errant venture. I had gambled on its being here and was happy to see it in system. Keena Margoth owns a resort complex on Elshandru-Pika and is a connoisseur of all things fine and exotic, which means Booster finds her almost as charming as the money she pays him. The 27th Hour Club at her resort has a standing challenge to patrons to name a drink the staff cannot mix, and if they can, the patron's bar tab is on the house. Booster regularly supplies her with recipes of new drinks and the liquor used to make them. I also think Booster has a thing for Keena, but Mirax thinks she's too young for her father, so I don't bring that subject up very often. During Kiwi's long recitation of the Elshandru-Pika mission, I keyed in and prepared to shoot to the errant venture a report on why we were there and what I wanted out of Booster. I shot it off as we made a slow approach, waited about 15 minutes for Booster to have read it and set preparations in motion, and then called in for permission to dock on the venture. The Tinted Blue obtained immediate clearance to land, and I set the shuttle down within 100 meters of the headhunter. Booster himself emerged from his office, resplendent in some very flashy and stylish, though hideously bright clothes. He greeted each of the passengers warmly himself, promising them the finest of accommodations after their frightful ordeal. He had some of his people take the passengers immediately up to the diamond level, and Anissa with them, leaving Kiwi and me at the shuttle. Booster introduced himself to Kiwi, and the younger man's eyes lit up. "You're Corin Horn's father-in-law." "He's married to my daughter, yes." Booster managed to keep a smile on his face. "I have a report from Adanian here that you know your way around astro-navigational equipment. Is that true?" Kiwi blinked once, then nodded. "A ship like this uses the Sanar Starpath system, doesn't it?" "It does indeed," Booster smiled in my direction. "He's a genius, clearly." "I thought you might think so." I patted Kiwi on the shoulder. "Got us out of a nasty scrape with the Invids. I was thinking, if the Tinta Line does not offer him a job, you might have work for him here." "Here, on the errant venture? Me? Here? On this ship that won the Battle of Thyphera?" Kiwi clung by his fingertips to his lower lip. "That wouldn't be possible, would it? I mean, this ship's history and its history with Rogue Squadron and all the things you've done. With it since then, this would be like being in a museum or a fantasy, or both, a fantasy museum. Booster's eyes narrowed, but he kept the smile on his face. We shall talk about this, but for now, Kiwi, you are my guest. Haslatak, conduct Kiwi Spart here to our Emerald Suite. Haslatak, a Twi'lek whose Leku were twitching like needle-stuck snakes, waved Kiwi toward the turbolifts. I heard Kiwi begin to pepper him with questions, but the Twi'lek just answered in his own tongue. Booster winced. Haven't heard Haslatak use that kind of language since the last Solistan gambling junket came through. Kiwi can be a bit much. Thanks for not letting him know who I am. You owe me. Put it on my tab. I jerked a thumb back at the shuttle. I need your people to pull the scanner memory and see if any of the Invid ships can tip us to where they're hiding. I'll have it done first thing. Booster regarded me carefully. Mara Jade is here. She and Calrissian arrived asking questions about George Cardass. Lando is up on the diamond level attempting to break the bank. Irritation underscored his words. How close is he? Booster shrugged. Not very, but closer than I'd like. I think, though, I will introduce him to your friend Kiwi. Sure, just tell Kiwi this is his chance to get Lando's perspective on having helped Wedge Antilles blow the Death Star at Endor. Oh, even your father wasn't that cruel, Corsac. You bring the best out of me, Booster. I glanced over at the headhunter. Is Mara angry about her ship? Doesn't seem to be, but she does want to speak with you. She seemed to know you were on the shuttle before you sent word. His eyes narrowed. She couldn't be using Jedi stuff to help Lando win, could she? Frankly, I think she'd like to buy Lando for what she thinks he's worth and sell him for what he thinks he's worth. I smiled. I don't think she's helping him. Beyond Booster, I saw a turbolift open and Mara Jade emerge from it. She headed straight for the two of us with just a hint of stiffness in her gait. That didn't strike me as odd about her, but her selection of clothes did seem inappropriate. The black slacks and copper tunics seemed a bit mannish, though the way she wore the short black cape slung so it covered the right side of her torso only did seem rather fashionable. I didn't see her lightsaber in evidence, but it could easily have been concealed beneath the cape. Booster bowed. I shall leave the two of you to talk while I see to Calrissian's comfort. Mara growled. Don't concern yourself that much with it. I arched an eyebrow at her. Aren't you in some sort of business with him? Some sort, yes. She gave me a disgusted look and plucked at her clothes. We arrive here, and he offers to get me more suitable attire, carting away what little of a wardrobe I already have. The tailor here sent up to my suite a whole rack of gowns and other things Lando wishes I'd wear around him. I retaliated by raiding his clothes closet. He's got good taste in fabric, but the tunics are a bit tight in the shoulders for me. I laughed. I bet he loves that. He doesn't, which is why I'll keep borrowing his stuff from time to time. The slight hint of a smile on her face slowly died. How was Luke when you left the academy? I shrugged. Physically, he's recovered from his ordeal. Mara gave me a sidelong glance. Mentally? He's got questions, some of which he knows he has, some of which he doesn't. I folded my arms across my chest. He was pleased that you checked to make certain he was going to be all right before you left Yavin 4, but he was confused that you didn't stay until he was up and about again. You actually spent more time with me during my recovery than you did with him. Her head came up. He doesn't think there's something between you and me, does he? I saw no indication of that being the case. I smiled and started walking over to the headhunter. He knows the two of us and knows it would never work between us. You and I, we can be comrades in arms and even friends. Right, but inside were coiled springs that are wound in the opposite directions. Her smile struggled back under her face as she fell in step with me. If we got close, it'd be an awful mess. I nodded, and we'd end up broken. And then your wife would kill us. Another good point. I shivered. Back to your question, though, Luke is enthused about the academy and how well the students did in defeating Exar Kun. When I left, though, I did kind of give him a turbo-laser critique of the school, and, well, everything, I guess. Everything? I frowned and leaned against the headhunter's forward landing gear. Luke suggested that if I left the academy when I did, I'd be making a huge mistake and that I'd fall prey to the dark side. I pretty much let him have it, pointing out that I've been to the dark side and walked away plenty of times before. I think Luke worked so hard to win his father back, and then found himself won back by his sister's love, that his perspective on the dark side is skewed. She watched me very closely. What do you mean? I opened my arms. Let's suppose Jedi are like everyone else, except in their force sensitivity. If they are, then there are going to be some folks who pretty much are born to the dark side and that's where they stay. They like it there, and they never learn there is another place to go. Let's say this is 10% of the population. Then there is another 10% at the other end of the spectrum who start on the good side of things and just never head over toward the bad side. The rest of us fall in the middle. Given the right stimulus, we could go over to the dark side, but the lure is going to have to be more substantial for some than for others. Luke went over to save the galaxy. I can imagine Darth Vader did the same thing. Both of them came back. The fact that Luke paid a high price for going over and coming back means that he feels everyone is as vulnerable as he was, and he worries a lot about that. I shrugged. Dealing with the dark side has been a big part of his life, especially his life as a Jedi. Of course it concerns him. Even so, to suggest everyone will make a journey to the dark side isn't clear thinking. I understand what you're saying. Mara nodded and reached up, tugging one of the monster claws from the headhunter's nose. Remind me never to lend you anything else. The beastie that left that in the ship was thinking of making a snack of Luke. I scratched at my beard. Do you think he makes too much of the dark side? Having seen the Emperor work, I'm not sure one can overemphasize the dangers of the dark side. Mara ran her thumb along the smooth tap of the claw. I think Luke may be looking for evil to be more profound than it is. You've seen it. Evil can be pretty plain. True enough. Some may have a talent for it, but you don't have to be talented to wallow in it. I glanced down. Your thinking along these lines is not that far off my own. That was just part of why I left, however. I also couldn't stay with Kip being heralded as a Jedi Knight while having avoided, in my mind, punishment for Kurita and the other system he destroyed. I know that his going after unreconstructed Imperials is popular in some circles, but murder is murder in my memory cache. Mara's face became impassive. Is that problem going to be one you can resolve? I shrugged. I don't know. Maybe Kurita expatriates will set up a judgment tribunal and render a verdict. I don't feel justice has been done here, but to tell the truth, I'm not sure what justice would be in such a case. That's all in the future, however. So the real reason you left the academy was to go after Mirax. I nodded. I had things to figure out and directions to travel to get me closer to her. On the way, I visited Corellia, and I've got some data for you on that George Cardass guy you asked about during my Bacta dip. It's all of Corsax's old files on him, if that will help. Certainly can't hurt. She gave me a quick nod. I've heard nothing new about Mirax, and the situation on Nal Hutta has changed. I know, but at least I have a place to start. I gave her as confident a smile as I could muster. I may still be looking for a quark in a mole of deuterium, but I'm narrowing the area I have to search in, and right now that's solid progress. I'll get there. I'll find her. No try, just do. End of chapter 32. That's all for today. See you in the next episode of RockMan Reads a Freakin Book. I Jedi.